are you? You guys okay? I'm feeling kind of vulnerable up here. That is a hard act to follow. Let's hear it again for Allie. That was great. That was really great. My name's Bob Safian, and I'm a parent of a student here at Con, and I'm the editor of a magazine called Fast Company. And I'm here to talk to you. I'm going to give you a version of a talk that I give to executives and business leaders all across the country. And it's about a concept that I call generation flux, okay? Flux with an L, right? And generation flux refers to two things, okay? It refers to the era we're living in right now, a time of rapid, high-velocity change that shows no signs of slowing down. And it refers to a group of people, to the kinds of people who are best positioned to thrive in this kind of environment of change, okay? And when I talk about generation flux, this is a group that is not defined by their chronological age. You can be young or old and be Gen Flux, right? The key criteria is your mindset, your attitude, a willingness and ability to creatively adapt and be flexible to changes that are going on around us. You guys with me? Good. Okay, so before I move into this, because we're on an academic campus, I feel like I should clarify what my credentials are. So when I'm talking about generations, I should make clear I am not a demographer. Okay, I've never studied demographics. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a data geek. You're not going to see any numbers or charts or graphs up there on the wall. All right? I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a professor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a technologist. I'm not a computer programmer. You're starting to get a sense of where this is going, right? And in terms of the business world, I'm not an economist. I've never worked as an investment advisor. I've never worked as a management consultant. I've never started a company. I'm not a CEO. I don't have an MBA. In fact, I have no advanced degrees of any kind. So what the heck am I doing here, right? What I am is a journalist, and for the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of working at major magazines like Time and Money and Fortune, and my current magazine, Fast Company, and I love it. I love it because I get to call up anyone I want at any time and ask them to talk with me, and for the most part they do, and they'll answer my questions. And so my staff and I gather information from a wide range of sources all across the economy, from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, from Madison Avenue advertising agencies to Hollywood studios. And so what I'm going to try to do over the next 15 minutes is to share with you some of the patterns that we see in that reporting, particularly around this idea of what I call generation flux, which I think describes the kinds of attributes that are most valuable in the world that you all are moving into, that we're all moving into, okay? Now, to understand generation flux, I think it's useful to go back in history a little bit. I'm going to use my magazine, Fast Company, as a tool for doing that. For those of you less familiar with Fast Company, we're a New York-based business media. We have a monthly print magazine that has a paid circulation of 800,000, so that's about the same size as Wired or Fortune. We also have a digital channel, so we reach 12 million people a month on fastcompany.com and a bunch of other channels, 2 million Twitter followers, YouTube, Facebook, right? You get the idea. Right? Now, Fast Company was launched in the late 90s as part of a raft of magazines associated with an idea called the new economy, okay? And the new economy was this idea that with the rise of the internet, all the old rules of business and of culture, they no longer applied. And there were new rules. And if you followed these new rules, anything was possible. Okay? And Fast Company extolled this with covers like Free Agent Nation and The Brand Called You, right? And we because of the rise of technology and the internet, we'd have new control over our lives, over our careers. We could start our own businesses. We could all get rich. People could day trade in their living rooms, right? This became known as the dot-com era. And what happened? The dot-com bubble burst. The idea of the new economy was thoroughly discredited. All of the media associated with the new economy, Industry Standard, Red Herring, Business 2.0, none of them survived. Only Fast Company lives on. Right? And it's natural to look back at those days as being something of a mirage. But I don't see it that way. Instead, I see it as a premonition, as a whiff of the days to come, of what I like to call the age of flux. Because so many of the things that were predicted back in the late 90s have now indeed come to pass. And we live in a mobile, social, global, interconnected world where the old rules really don't apply anymore. The difference between back then and today, between the days of the new economy and the age of flux, is that back then we thought we knew what the new rules were, right? We thought we knew what it would take to succeed. And today, if we're honest with ourselves, and I hear this from business leaders and leaders all across the country, if we're honest with ourselves, we have no idea what the new rules are. We have no idea what it's going to take to succeed in the long run. And we are, in a very real sense, living in a time of chaos, a time of chaotic change, right? Now, of all the things that I am not expert in, chaos theory is also among them. But this guy is an expert in chaos theory. His name is DJ Patil. He did a breakthrough research on chaos theory as a professor at the University of Maryland. He then went on to help the State Department on bioweapons containment. He worked for the Department of Defense on threat assessment. He then moved out to Silicon Valley and helped PayPal and eBay build their internet fraud and security apparatus. He was part of the launch team on LinkedIn. So the feature on across the social web, that people you may know function, that's something that DJ came up with in his team. He then worked as a venture capitalist. He launched a company called RelateIQ that got bought last year by Salesforce for $500 million. And earlier this year, he was tapped by President Obama to join the White House to become America's first chief data scientist, okay? The US chief data scientist. And he is an expert in chaos theory and a member of Generation Flux. And I asked him to explain chaos theory to me. He used weather forecasting as an analogy, so I'm going to try to relate that to you, okay? When we see a weather forecast, whether online, on our phone, right, radio, television, you get your 5-day forecast like this. And when we get something like this, we all have the same reaction to it, which is, why is it so often wrong, right? We all think the same thing. So I asked DJ this. I said, DJ, why is it wrong so much? And he said, listen, when you look at all the variables that go into predicting the weather, it is tremendously, tremendously complicated. Sometimes, he said, sometimes. And other times it's quite simple, right? Sometimes we can make a remarkably accurate forecast for the next 15 days. And sometimes you can make a good forecast for the next 3 days. And sometimes we don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 hours, right? The key insight, he said, with chaos theory is recognizing when things are chaotic and when they're not, and acting accordingly, okay? Now, my argument, my experience, is that today we are living in a next 2 hours era, right? Things are moving and changing that fast. Now, I'll give you some examples. You're going to be familiar with them, right? This is Fast Company's cover story a few years ago, Mark Zuckerberg on the cover. At the time we did that story, Facebook had 19 million users, right? Today it has 1.3 billion across the globe and growing. I'd like to say that I knew Facebook would be the world-changing juggernaut that it's become. I didn't, but we wanted to talk about social media, and Mark had a compelling backstory as a way to do that. Anybody here see the movie Social Network? Right? That was sort of the story we told. Good movie. Mark's story had a natural human appeal, which made it worthwhile for us to write about him, in the same way that it turns out his product has a natural human appeal, and Facebook has become so ubiquitous that now in some ways it seems old compared to Snapchat, right? Compared to Instagram, and yet it really wasn't but a few years ago when Facebook didn't exist at all, when none of the social media existed. Now it's deeply embedded in everything we do across global culture. This is an example of the kind of chaotic change that we're living in. What else is chaotic? The iPhone, right? You go back a few years ago and the global smartphone market was dominated by 3 companies: Nokia, RIM, the makers of BlackBerry, and Motorola, right? Those are not the companies we talk about anymore, right? It's Apple and Samsung. Now that kind of transition in a global business of multi-billion-dollar scale, that's unprecedented, right? That just doesn't happen. But today, in our business world, in our culture, it's happening everywhere. Industries, businesses are being transformed all across, from healthcare to lodging to automotive, everywhere, right? I went down to visit DJ Patil, I mentioned earlier, at the White House a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about how far behind our government is in the pace of change. And that part of the reason he's down there is because we have to accelerate, because the government's moving farther and farther behind as the rest of culture and business moves faster and faster ahead. We're getting pulled behind. Now, for you guys as students here, right, you have the advantage of having grown up in this era, right? And in a lot of ways, that gives you tremendous advantages. But even though you may feel like you're used to this world, you haven't really been trained for it. You've been trained, you've been sheltered, even here at Con, okay, from the kinds of approaches that are going to be necessary in the world we're moving into. And I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that by using physics. Now, you guessed it. I don't know squat about physics, right? So those of you who are physics majors in here, pardon me if I oversimplify things, okay? But I'm borrowing something. I'm going to share something I learned from a woman named Meg Wheatley, who wrote a book called Leadership and the New Science, okay? And Meg talks about the primacy in our Western culture of what she calls of Newtonian physics. I have to consult my notes for this because, you know, I really don't know physics. But in a Newtonian world, okay, patterns are what rule, right? You have cause and effect, the laws of cause and effect define our physical universe, right? And they define our psychological approach to it. So historically, this was God is the great clockmaker, right? The world is like a machine. If something doesn't work right, you fix that part. The goal is stability, right? The laws of the world are to drive us to stability. And this mindset, this approach, okay, is connected across our culture. So when you go into a classroom and you have rows of seats, right? Order, assembly lines, hierarchies in companies, right? When we talk about careers and we talk about career tracks and ladders, everything being organized in this way, this is a reflection of our Newtonian view of the world, okay? But when scientists started to be able to study matter at a subatomic level, they saw something else. It was messier. It was chaotic, right? And all those Newtonian rules of cause and effect, either or, on or off, suddenly they started to break down. And when you look at subatomic matter, okay, if you look at it a certain way, it looks like a wave. And if you look at it another way, it looks like a particle. So the question is, what is it, a wave or a particle? And even asking that question is a Newtonian way of looking at it, right? Because, of course, it's both. And what we need to be able to live in a world that is quantum, and my argument is that a quantum view of the world is a more sophisticated way of thinking about it than simply thinking about it as Newtonian alone, right? We have to be able to endure and be able to accept conflicting states at the same time, conflicting features, and be able to roll with those things as the world changes around us in ways that seem to break rules, okay? You guys still with me? All right. I'm going to introduce you, before I finish up, I'm going to introduce you a couple of examples of people who I think of as being part of Generation Flux, and I hope this helps illuminate how this might work for you. These are, let me go on. These are two characters who have written about for Generation Flux, Raina Kumra on the left and Bob Greenberg on the right. I'm going to talk mostly about Raina. Raina started out as a documentary filmmaker. She then went to Harvard Graduate School and got a graduate degree in design and architecture. She then became a computer programmer. She then worked in the advertising world. She then started her own nonprofit in Malawi. She then started to work for the State Department. Then she became the director of innovation at something called the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which is the media entity within the government that runs Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and things like that. And she now runs her own consulting firm based in the cloud. As you can see, she's barely 30 years old. Few of us can aspire to Raina's pace, right? But we can aspire to her attitude. And what she says is, you know, I keep trying to put new things in my backpack, and eventually I'll have a full toolkit, okay? The most important skill in the age of flux is the ability to add new skills. This woman's name is Angela Blanchard. She runs a nonprofit in Houston called Neighborhood Centers. They provide care to 250,000 families across the Gulf Coast, needy families across the Gulf Coast. And When Angela is hiring people today, she says every job she hires for is what she calls an FIO job. I said, what's an FIO stand for? She says, figure it out, right? All the jobs are figure it out jobs. She says, she comes in, she interviews people, and they say, well, you know, I'm not really trained for that. I don't really know how to do that. She says, yeah, nobody is. Nobody knows how to do them. They're all FIO jobs. We're all trying to figure it out as we go along. Finally, this woman is Terry Kelly. Terry Kelly is the CEO of a large multinational based in Delaware called WL Gore. They make a wide range of products from Gore-Tex fabrics to Elixir guitar strings to a whole bunch of industrial products. And Terry had an idea not long ago. She said, you know, I want to build a training program to try to create my next generation of leaders. Okay? So she canvassed her current leadership team and asked each of them what job was most valuable to them in giving them the skills that they needed today. And she figured she'd take the results of all that research and put together a training program, right? This seems like it makes sense. Well, it turns out that when she did this research, almost uniformly, the job that her key people said was most valuable to them was the job that was most ambiguous, was the job where they struggled the most, where they had the hardest time, okay? Now, the message to them, to her, was, I can't make a training program that's going to make that work. The lesson for all of us is that we're going to be over our heads a lot, and that's a good thing. That's what we need to be able to prepare ourselves for the world that we're moving into. All right, I'm going to finish up with a quote, since that seems to be the way you end these talks. I hope I've left you just a little bit unsettled and a little bit confused. That's on purpose. That's the way I feel like we have to be, on our toes in that way. This quote is from 150 years ago. It's paraphrased from Charles Darwin, and it goes like this: it's not the strongest of the species that survives, right? It's not the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. And if there's anything that I hope you take with you and out into the world, it's that. Thanks a lot, everybody.